Welcome to On-Demand Instructions video on Writing Standard 3.1. We will discuss how to engage a reader in a narrative and create a smooth progression of events. We will be covering the core standards in literature. Write narratives to develop real or imagined experiences or events using effective technique, well-chosen details, and well-structured event sequences. Engage and orient the reader by setting out a problem, situation, or observation, establishing one or multiple points of view, and introducing a narrator and/or characters. Create a smooth progression of experiences or events. This session's goals are to learn how to write narratives to engage and orient a reader. Let's start with what you might already know about this subject by answering these questions. What is a narrative? What is a point of view? How do you create a smooth progression of experiences or events? When you are writing a narrative, think of it as telling a story. You can include anecdotes, experience, and personal events. Express yourself in a creative and moving way. Include all the parts of a story: introduction, plot, characters, setting, climax, and conclusion. It is common for a narrative to be written from the author's viewpoint. However, this is not the sole standpoint. Creativity in narratives often presents itself in the perspective of the author. Creating a problem in a piece of writing means dealing with difficult moral questions. An example of this in a story could be, should I lie to my mother so that my brother can join the army? A lie is generally considered to be bad. However, loyalty to a brother could be considered good. This question is complex because it deals with more than one problem: the lie, loyalty to one's mother, loyalty to one's brother, and whether or not joining the army is a good idea. Moral situations can be tricky because they are often subjective. Maybe the mother is not a kind person and is trying to keep the brother home for her own reasons. She may be angry or violent, and the brother may just need to get away for his own safety. On the other hand, maybe the brother is leaving for selfish reasons and doesn't know what he is getting into, and the mother is trying to protect him. The situation in a narrative is an event or happening or a set of circumstances. A common situation is when a criminal commits a crime that will not see justice, and a character seeking vengeance punishes the criminal outside of the law. Another situation is someone getting accused of a crime he didn't commit and is pursued by the law. There are numerous and infinite situations that could occur in a narrative. An observation is something that may be significant, that is watched or noticed. It is not an assumption, but is something that is actually seen. If someone said the dog is barking because he's hungry, this would be an assumption, as they don't know why the dog is barking. However, the dog is barking is an observation because it can readily be seen. An observation in a narrative would be anything that can be seen or is noticed, such as a location or what someone is doing. A point of view in literature is how the author allows the reader to see and hear what is going on. A good author can fix a reader's attention on the detail, opinion, or emotion the author wants to emphasize by manipulating the point of view. There are 3 different points of view. In a first-person point of view, the author writes from the character's viewpoint. The character is actually narrating the story. The author uses words like I, me, my, mine when speaking as the character. One advantage of this type of narration is that the reader gets to hear the thoughts of the narrator and see the world through his or her eyes. An example of first-person narration is in the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The story is told completely from the point of view of Scout, a young girl. Scout doesn't understand everything that's going on, but the reader does because she gives enough information that it can be inferred. In second-person narration, the author uses you and your. Writers rarely speak directly to the reader, and this form of narration is not often used. The second-person point of view draws the reader into the story, almost making him part of the action. Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney was written in a second person to make the experiences of an unnamed main character more personal and intimate for the reader. Third person is the point of view from an outsider looking in at the action. The writer may use third person omniscient, where the thoughts of every character are open to the reader. Or the author may use third-person limited, in which the reader enters only one character's mind. Third-person limited differs from first-person because it is the author's voice, not the character's voice, which is heard in the narration. An example of third-person narration is in Virginia Woolf's novel, Mrs. Dalloway. You are in one character's mind at a time. You know of Mrs. Dalloway's thoughts about Peter, the love of her youth, and then later on in the story you know of Peter's thoughts of Mrs. Dalloway. In a third-person narration, either omniscient or limited, the reader watches the story unfold as an outsider. Most writers choose this point of view. If you can answer the question of who is speaking, you can find who the narrator is. An omniscient narrator will just know things. The narrator is kind of like the author, but has a personality and traits. The narrator must have some kind of a personality, otherwise a story would not hold the reader's interest. At some point, the author may choose to be inside the head of a character, thus introducing that character. Read the following passage from The Lost World by Michael Crichton. Mr. Crichton starts out as an omniscient narrator, observing Malcolm's appearance and previous events in his life. Then he goes into Malcolm's head, stating, "He could not have wished for a more knowledgeable audience," introducing the character. You can create a smooth progression of experiences or events by building events up to create a climax. This creates tension and suspense. The tension is a result of conflict and makes a story interesting. Rising action is the ingredient that complicates matters in a plot. It comprises all the decisions, background circumstances, and character flaws to create twists and turns toward a climax. So by setting out a problem, situation, or observation, establishing a point of view, and introducing a narrator or characters, you can create smooth progression of experiences or events. Almost all authors use these things in some way. Imagine a story where there was never a character introduced, and how boring it would be. Or imagine an author skipping from first person to third person to second person to first person limited, etc. That would be confusing to try to follow. These basics are what makes a story interesting and coherent to a reader. An example of this being used properly is in the story The Three Little Pigs. The author sets out a problem of a wolf who wanted to eat little piggies. This was contrary to the piggies' intentions, as they did not want to get eaten. This story is told from a third-person omniscient point of view, as the reader is viewing it from the outside. The events, the piggies leaving home, building houses, and escaping the wolf smoothly, build up to the final climax of the wolf falling into the pot and being killed. Let's do an activity to further enhance your skills. Read the following story. As you read, note how the characters and/or narrator are introduced. Also know what point of view the story is in, what problems are presented, and how it progresses. How do professional writers use this information? Professional writers lay stories out like this to make them more interesting. A story would be boring or confusing without this kind of structure to keep it together and make it an experience for the reader. How can I use this? You can apply these techniques in your own writing to create an interesting and cohesive story or narrative. The story will make more sense in the long run, and if you are doing it for a school assignment, you may receive a higher grade. Why is this important? It's important to write coherently and with purpose to get your point across. It would be difficult to make your point or tell a story with no structure. As a student, you're expected to know how to write a narrative using all of the techniques we went over to create an engaging story. We've come to the end of our session. We have discussed narratives, problems, situations, observations, points of view, narrators, and characters. To learn more, go to these websites for additional information. Return to www.ondemandinstruction.com for more instructional videos, podcasts, and materials. We update the site weekly.